Hello, everybody. It is Thursday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined by sports columnist Jason Mackey. Jason, we're going to reformat your show a little bit here. You've been doing First 10 daily for a few weeks, but we're trying to free you up to work on some projects and kind of talking a little bit more longer depth with you and go a little bit longer. So you're going to be doing a new show on Thursdays with me, and then on Saturdays, you're going to have some special guests. Is there anything you want to tell our guests here, our viewers here at the top?
Yeah, I'm excited about this, Adam. I think it's a good format. As far as First 10, I enjoyed it, but I will enjoy more the opportunity to kind of have more of a conversation. I struggled to wedge all of the stuff that I wanted to get into 10 minutes and feel like I was covering it. Maybe that was a me problem. Very possible. But yeah, we're going to run the gamut on guests on this show. I think it's going to be some local Pittsburgh media members, some people who used to work at the Post-Gazette, people readers and viewers are plenty familiar with, some former athletes as well, some former athletes now in the media. I like the idea of having this as a little bit of a plaything to go different places with, and guys that played here that we haven't heard from in a while, to track them down and talk about their careers. And so, yeah, there's going to be all kinds of different guests. I want it to be guest centric, to be honest with you. I don't want to just sit there and talk to people for 30 minutes by myself. I don't know if I'm that interesting, but we're going to have a lot of fun having conversations with people and hopefully some deeper ones. And I'm also excited for this show. I've watched the other ones that we've done, and I'm excited to be in this seat and debate some stuff with you.
Yes, I'm excited as well. We've done some of these in the past, Jason, where it's been you and me, but we haven't been able to find kind of regularity. So I'm excited to get into that. Today, folks, we're going to be talking about the Steelers receiver situation at the top. How did they get into this mess over the course of a period of years, and how did they get out of it? We're also going to talk about Pitt basketball, their big win against North Carolina, what it means for their postseason resume. Also talk a little Penn State hiring Jim Knowles away from Ohio State, spending big money to do it. And then we're going to wrap the show with talking about Jason's wheelhouse, the Pirates and their inactivity this offseason. So we hope you'll stick around for all of that. First, before we get into it, we're going to thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. This show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder and Associates. If you're injured in an accident, you're probably wondering what's next. For over 40 years, Edgar Snyder and Associates has helped injury victims answer the question, whether it's gathering evidence, collecting medical records, or dealing with insurance companies. Edgar Snyder and Associates has helped over 75,000 people handle what's next. Call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. All right, Jason, let's dig into it with the Steelers here and their receiver situation. Art Rooney's generated a lot of headlines in the last couple of days for his Monday availability with reporters, in which he says, we're going to build around the running game. We're going to build around the running game. And that angered a lot of people because I think a lot of people think it's reductive in a passing league. Why are you still building around the run? I quibble with that for two reasons, Jason. Number one is that it's not as much of a passing league as it was in the Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, those types of days. Yes, you have a Patrick Mahomes, but you also have a degree of these top quarterbacks being athletic in ways that I don't think that they were in that heavy passing era where these guys were just sitting in the pocket and throwing darts. And the second reason I don't understand why people are quibbling with it is that the Steelers don't have the personnel to play any other way. You've got your best receiver is something of a malcontent. Your second best receiver in Calvin Austin III is maybe a 3 or a 4 on a good team. The tight end, Pat Freiermuth, can contribute, but he's not he doesn't have the ability to take over a game like a Travis Kelce does. I know it's fun to punch Mike Tomlin for, the Steelers' problems, but I think this is their biggest organizational failure, is that they just don't have the guys to play a different way than what Art Rooney's talking about.
Well, yeah, and that goes both ways. And here's what I mean by that. It's both. It's both. They don't have the wide receivers to compete in the modern day NFL, and they're not running the ball as effectively as they should to rely on the running game the way Art Rooney II is talking about. I understand why people are upset at what Art said. He's also not wrong. Look at good teams. They run the football effectively. Now, that looks different. If you're the Philadelphia Eagles, you're going to run it through Saquon Barkley. It's pretty easy. If you're the Kansas City Chiefs, you need to be able to run it when you need to run it. Like, obviously your offense is going to be based around Patrick Mahomes. No, Kansas City does things a little bit differently. I don't think the Steelers did either one, really. I mean, they had fits and spurts this past season, Adam, against mediocre teams who struggled to stop the run. Could they do it consistently and when they needed to? Did we know from where it was coming? No. They were not a good running team, and they haven't been a good running team. So I understand what Art is saying, that we need to be able to run the football effectively. I understand what you're saying. They don't have the personnel to do that. That's actually something I'm going to be looking into for Sunday about where to go from here. How do you find a running, maybe in the draft, maybe free agency? And right now it's fascinating to me. If you look around the NFL and what they're doing with teams signing free agent backs, I mean, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, there's an opportunity to spend a little bit of money here. Art kind of alluded to it. Just need to spend it the right way.
Let's talk a little bit more about how they got here at the receiver position, and what their biggest mistakes have been in your mind. Was it the second round picks you used on George Pickens and Chase Claypool, who, worked out to varying degrees? I think George Pickens is more of an upstairs type of battle than a question about his ability. But I think he still ended up just slightly under 1,000 yards for the season. Was it Diontae Johnson in the second contract and investing in him and choosing him as a guy that you were going to look at for years, who now may be out of the league with the way he conducted himself in Baltimore or Carolina? And, I don't know how many other teams he played for this season, Jason. And then
I think all of them, actually.
Exactly. And then, I even go back to, the decision to let JuJu Smith-Schuster go and invest in these blockheads. Things didn't work out with JuJu physically. But I think you looked at him as a guy who was willing to go into those tough areas, even when his athleticism waned, and who was invested in this team in a way that I don't know we've seen at this position. So what do you see as the biggest mistake that they've made? Is it the guys that they've drafted? Is it the guys that they've given second contracts to? Or is it just the general lack of depth that they've been able to cultivate behind them?
Adam, no, it's not going to be an unpopular opinion. It's just a little bit sideways of yours. I don't think it's a roster building problem. I think it's a personality maintenance problem. Like, we can say they maybe drafted the wrong guys. They evaluated the wrong guys. They didn't weight how these guys conducted themselves heavy enough. I think that's fair. I've also been around the Steelers quite a bit, and I don't like the way they've handled some of these guys. Like, I guess I understand it from Mike Tomlin's perspective. Like, he's trying to keep the ship afloat, and he doesn't want, a potential problem personality to burst apart at the seams. I'm sorry. With some of the personalities they've had, they've let too much crap happen. Yeah, I don't want to hear Chase Claypool talking about music. Some of the antics that George Pickens has produced that they've let occur and not really directly addressed. That's the biggest problem for me. I understand in the moment drafting these guys, even committing a second contract to Diontae Johnson, he was productive. And at the time they did that, it wasn't an exorbitant, ugly contract. I just don't think they've come down hard enough on some of these guys and say, look, this is the way we play. This is the Steelers standard. These are the rules. If you don't like it, get gone, whatever, ways of getting through to them. And I think that's the biggest failure.
For me, Jason, I think it's the inability to turn these later round draft picks. I mean, that's what the Steelers did best, right? I think Antonio Brown's the shining example of a 6th round pick. You turned into an all-time great. But you can go down the line of useful receivers that they found in later rounds. They haven't drafted one in the first round since 2006, because I'm working on my Steelers mock draft tracker, and that was something that Mel Kiper Jr. Noted. They don't use first round picks on these guys because they've always had an ability to dip into the draft and find them, but that has dried up. And I look at that as probably the biggest mistake is both not finding the right guys. And I think this is where one of the areas where the overemphasis on the defense kind of reveals itself, is that you haven't necessarily had a big stable of guys coming through to pick from. You've been investing those picks in a defense that has remained leaky. And I think that shows up over a period of time. It's not one draft. It's maybe not two drafts, but over 5, 6, 7 drafts.
Sure.
When you go away from adding a guy every year that you can throw in the mix, throw in your system, and see what happens, that's where it starts to reveal itself. I'll be curious to see what happens with Roman Wilson, because I think he's the one wild card, Jason, of a guy who could fit both of those molds. You get him in a later round of the draft, but you didn't get to see him on the field this season because of injury. What's your level of hope? Considering that's a draft pick that I think you and I were both excited about when it happened. Yeah. Do you think he's a guy that can come in and essentially be an extra draft pick this season, given that you didn't get to see him at all in 2024?
I think he can be an extra draft pick. Now, what I saw out of Roman Wilson during OTAs and minicamp, and even, it was the first padded practice, I think, where he was injured. I don't have a lot of hope this is a guy that's going to contribute a ton this season. I don't. I wish I had a different answer, because it might satisfy some people. The Steelers need to do a lot of things to fix their wide receiver room. I just don't know how much Roman Wilson is going to be a part of it. Like, is he a 4 and Calvin Austin the third is your third? Maybe. I mean, I think that's the top end for me. I think they need to get, a heck of a lot deeper. They need to get a 1A to a 1B, with Pickens, somebody there. They need to get a veteran. Hopefully those guys are one box that you can check. But I was not overly impressed with Roman Wilson, Adam.
Yeah, that's something that I have not seen as not being down at the facility at time, but it's, what I've continued to hear from you and from, across the spectrum is that the body just doesn't seem to be, when you're talking about college football, you like to say that they have a Big Ten ready body. So in this case, is he ready for the rigors of the NFL and a 17-game schedule as kind of a smaller guy?
I mean, there were just a lot of drops. Like, that was the biggest thing to me. We're talking about OTAs, minicamp. You should be hauling in passes. You're running with the 1s and the 2s. There were too many drops for me. And the body is a concern. He's not healthy. I did not see anything on the practice field where you're like, wow, this guy can move. Even without pads, like Troy Fautanu was noticeable. Peyton Wilson, his athleticism was noticeable early on. And we saw how that translated even, in Fautanu's case, in a limited sample size. I didn't see the same thing with Roman Wilson.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Jason, what needs to change in their evaluation process going into this offseason with, both free agency and the draft? Is it personality? Is it finding guys who are going to fit better in the culture of the Steelers? Is there a physical thing that they're missing with some of these guys? What do you look at and say they've got to change? Because that's what Mike Tomlin and Art Rooney both talked about, is there's got to be some level of changes. I think it starts personnel-wise at this position. What's your assessment there?
Yeah, I think they need a strong personality, Adam. A strong personality who offers them above Allen Robinson III production. And that's going to cost some money. Like, they need a veteran receiver who's been there, who's going to produce, who can still play, and who also can get through to George Pickens. I mean, that's the sort of $1 million question here. And quite literally, can he mature? Can he figure it out? And if you can bring somebody in here that says, this is how you're a pro, this is how we do things, this is how it benefits you, this is how we're going to work together, this is the culture created, this is what your career can be if you act this way. As of now, you're in the 4th and final year of your rookie deal, and you have nothing guaranteed beyond this year. You have all the talent in the world, and you have the opportunity to make just an absolute absurd amount of money, or you could be playing in Germany in 2 years. Like, this is where it goes. Somebody to sit him down and get through to him and get him on the right path. I don't know enough about the available wide receivers personally. I can look at their production. I can look at who's been a part of an important offense. But, I mean, they need that type of personality, somebody who's not scared to come in here and saddle up next to a guy and befriend him. I'm not saying, sit George Pickens down and yell at him. That's not how you do this. But somebody that can really set a tone for that room, that can change the culture in that room. And I don't care what it costs, because it's that important to get the production in the off-field leadership type of stuff.
Jason, was there anything else that stood out to you about Art Rooney's comments this week as kind of the big headline?
There's a whole bunch. We could talk about this for hours. The Mike Tomlin stuff didn't make sense to me. I wrote about this yesterday. How Mike is a good coach and he's won a bunch of games and whatever. Like, I didn't understand how that's a qualification to keep it. Like, it was almost the most Pittsburgh reasoning of all time. Something has always been a certain way. So, we know that it's always going to be that way in the future. No, it's not. Mike hasn't produced enough recently. I don't understand that. At the same time, what are you going to do? There's a lot left on the contract. The quarterback stuff I thought was enlightening, Adam. I mean, it points me toward Justin Fields. I'm sure, other podcasts, and you included, have gotten into this on our site, so I won't belabor it. But I mean, to me, Justin Fields makes the most sense. It's a multiple year deal, somebody they can grow with. And if it doesn't work, well, it takes you back to the draft in April in Pittsburgh, 2026, and they could take a guy there. So, anyway, I don't want to get too much on my soapbox, but there was a lot that there's a reason he's been making some headlines, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be some level of the silly season here too, Jason, because I saw some reports saying, well, maybe Russell Wilson's closer to coming back after a couple of weeks of talking about Justin Fields. So, I think we're just going to have to get used to that until March when it's going to be resolved probably one way or another.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to watch that. All right, Jason, we're going to get into some Pitt basketball talk. They beat North Carolina on Tuesday night. We're recording this on Wednesday, so I almost said last night. But when you're listening to this, it'll be 2 days ago. A big win for the Panthers. Also, Penn State making big headlines this week, taking Jim Knowles as defensive coordinator away from the national champion Ohio State Buckeyes. We're going to dig into that into the next segment. But first, we have a message from our friends at Bradenton, Florida.
Embrace the laid-back charm of island life while sinking your toes in the sand and discovering real, authentic Florida in the Bradenton area. Unspoiled beauty and pristine beaches, a vibrant waterfront downtown energized by local arts and culture, fresh Floridian cuisine with a flourish of rich history, and friendly locals ready to welcome you to this preserved paradise on Florida's Gulf Coast. Plan your visit today at BradentonGulfIslands.com.
We are back here, Adam Bittner, Jason Mackey, talking Pitt and Penn State, some college sports news that this popped up in the last week. Jason, Pitt beats North Carolina at home on Tuesday night, trailed for a lot of that game, but had a very resilient second half. How important was that win for them? Because I always look at college, but this is my general rule of thumb. It's not a hard and fast rule. Obviously, there's more exceptions than maybe not, but I say, you can afford to lose 10 games in a season to make the NCAA tournament. Anything more than that, you have to make up in the conference tournament. If they lose that game to North Carolina, they're at 7 going into February and March. I think that was almost a must win considering the way they've been able to play against North Carolina in recent years. I'm going to get into that in a minute, but just your reaction to the way they dug that one out, given the struggles that they've been going through lately.
I like that rule, Adam. That's good. 20 plus 10, 30. It makes a lot of sense. I look at it from a different perspective. I'm going to look at it from what I saw on the court last night or 2 nights ago, and how Pitt went about getting this victory. I think this team is learning a lot about itself over the past 2 games. Prior to the 4-game losing streak, I think they were entirely too guard dependent. No, Ish Leggett and Jalen Lowe, very impressive players. But they've become more than that. I look at last 2 nights ago. Sorry, I'm going to keep misspeaking. But I look at that victory over North Carolina as so much more than those 2 guys, Adam. I thought Zach Austin was fantastic. I thought they were great blocking shots, finished with 9 of them. Zach Austin with a couple of really important threes down the stretch. Damian Dunn was everywhere. And they've sort of shortened the bench. They've concentrated their efforts in guys that are producing. I like that. And Ish Leggett and Jalen Lowe have learned how to also score and facilitate. They're not turning the ball over a ton. So to me, it's more game play style, what Pitt is able to do. They're still not rebounding as well as I would like, or I think as well as Jeff Capel would like, more importantly. But I think they're kind of learning what they have, even facilitating inside with Cam Corrin. I thought he played an excellent game as well. And, running some of their offense when they need to through him. And you saw the big adjustment at halftime. Switching off screens and whatnot, and how they were defending North Carolina and really pressured them at the 3-point line, which has been an Achilles heel. So, yeah, I think it was an important win, but I think it's also important that Pitt's learning a lot about itself.
Jason, Pitt has 4 wins against Carolina since 2020-21. It's hard to mix those numbers.
There's so many wins, Adam.
2021, yes. That's the most of anybody in that span against the Carolina team that's, I think, been really up and down. Could win the national championship some years, has been a disappointment to their fans in others. But do you look at that and say that this is Pitt's program upside still, that they can still compete with the best of the best, and that they just have to put a few more things together? And because I think we often feel like they're very far away from that program that I grew up with, that was competing for Big East championships, that was serious about making Elite Eight Final Four runs. But I look at a stat like that they kept teasing over and over on SportsCenter last night after the game and say, the bones of this program are still here, and Jeff Capel's built it to a certain level, but maybe there is still a little bit more upside to mine here.
I do. I completely believe that. And I said a minute ago, I still think this Pitt team is realizing what it can be. I don't think it completely knows that. I think it had to make an important adjustment in its season. I mean, come on. Watch Jalen Lowe, watch Ish Leggett. There is a lot of talent on this team, and there's a lot of guys that play important roles. Is that going to be a DeJuan Blair type of team, or Sam Young, or any of the other, incredible teams that you and I both grew up watching? I don't know. I think we're going to learn that in the ACC tournament and perhaps beyond. But we went into the season thinking that Pitt should and could be an NCAA tournament team. And even with the 4-game losing streak, I still feel they can be. And I think the North Carolina game proved it. I was a little underwhelmed by North Carolina, Adam, if we're being honest. I'm surprised how this team is not better. This was something they made mention of on the broadcast, but I agreed with it. Looked like this team quit in the second half. I didn't quite understand that. Probably
only 21 points in the second half, Jason. That's just, I think, a season low that Pitt has allowed all season to anyone.
But I mean, down the stretch, what was Pitt scored 14 of the final 17, something like that. I had written 13 of the final 17. I don't know. It was a lot. Just not a lot of fight. I was surprised by that.
Jason, you mentioned this a little bit. I think a lot of people, and it came up in the Pitt mailbag video earlier in the week that Chris Carter and Stephen Thompson did. If you didn't see that, check that out. But a lot of people are still concerned about the shooting. Do you feel like, what you mentioned earlier, that they're starting to find ways to, hide that weakness a little bit better than they were during the 4-game losing streak and maybe earlier in the season?
Yeah, I mean, they shot 44% last night. I'm kind of okay with that. 34.6 from 3. So I check out my notes here that I found, but no, I mean, I'm not terribly concerned with the shooting. The shooting was just fine late. Zach Austin, like I said, a couple made threes. Damian Dunn gave them enough. I think they're facilitating their offense a little bit differently. But I don't look at the shooting as a problem. I look at the turnovers, the forced shots, some things when you see people lock up on their guards and Pitt's not really able to do anything else as the problem. But the actual shot making, that didn't concern me as much, at least not in the bigger picture.
Let's switch gears to Penn State, Jason. The big headline this week: Penn State steals Jim Knowles from Ohio State. Now makes him the highest paid coordinator ever, over $3 million. There's a lot of head coaches, Jason, in Division I that don't make $3 million. Does this change the tone of Penn State? Because, my perception for the last couple of years has been that you have, what they love to say, if you listen to the ads at halftime at the games, the largest dues-paying alumni association in the world. I believe the Wall Street Journal a couple of years ago reported Penn State has the most CEOs of any university in America. But they haven't been able to leverage that for multiple reasons. A, because it was illegal on some level to pay the players. And I think you had an entrenched donor class, kind of the old guard who grew up with Joe Pa, who wasn't asking them to pay for his salary, who wasn't asking them for massive facility upgrades. And I think Penn State kind of fell behind culturally in the arms race. But this, to me, is a huge statement, Jason, that there's an understanding here that Penn State has resources to leverage and may finally be doing it on the scale that Ohio State, that of Michigan, that the teams that they have to beat in this Big Ten race every year have been doing for years. Is that how you read that in conjunction with the guys they've been able to keep, from Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, Drew Aller, Denai Dennis Sutton, all of those guys that I think we expected to go to the NFL that have decided to come back for one more year.
Yeah, and I also think it's an important recruiting tool for the future. I mean, not only do I think a lot of Jim Knowles as an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator, and what he knows now clearly if you look at Ohio State's defense, but how if you're a transfer, even a high school kid, you're going to get a chance to play for Jim Knowles and look at what he's accomplished. I mean, I don't know. I guess not that Penn State needs the recruiting help, but I think that certainly helps the image of your program, the style you're able to play, the players you're able to attract. Maybe you're able to push somebody across the finish line, that sort of deal. Penn State hasn't spent a ton relative, at least to the, upper level teams in NIL. I was surprised reading those numbers, in the college football playoff. I think they were, 7, 8, 9, maybe a little bit lower among those 12 teams in terms of NIL spending. I mean, this is one way to get more bang for the buck. It's something the Pirates, a team that I cover, believes in, coaching, scouting processes more than players. And people obviously don't like that method too much, but it does make sense to me, on the college football level and Jim Knowles and what he's able to provide. So I like the hire. It didn't surprise me seeing Tom Allen leave and basically get this deal. Assistant coaches are getting paid too. Coordinators are getting paid too. And so he went to get more money in a lateral job, and Jim Knowles did too. So good for Penn State for being in the running with this stuff.
Yeah, and I think next year, a year from now, Jason, you're going to see that number maybe be a little bit higher if Penn State gets into the playoff. Maybe be closer to the upper echelon. I think the Micah Shrewsbury departure in basketball was kind of a black swan event for Penn State, in that they had their best basketball season in a long time, lost their coach because of the NIL base, and a lot of people looked at that and said, well, if this is what's going to happen in basketball, are we going to get swamped in football too if we don't get serious? And pretty much since then, I think Pat Kraft's made a lot of great decisions to offset that. And now you have a roster going into next season that the people feel good about that. And that's where I want to go as my next jumping off point on Penn State. Buzzy national title pick this week since the Knowles hiring. I think I saw Bill Connolly from ESPN, their big stats guy, picked Penn State to win the title. There was an on-3 bracket that picked them bouncing around that Brett Bielema at Illinois was tweeting about. They had the rest of the Big Ten as lower seeds. I think they had Ohio State and Michigan playing in an 8-9 game, while Penn State was the second seed and the presumptive Big Ten champion. So, Jason, what's your read on this program as a possible national title contender next year?
I mean, I'm right there, Adam. They were in the Final Four, and they're going to return, quite a bit on defense. I mean, I know they lost some. They're not returning everybody, but they've got the quarterback thing figured out. I am a Drew Aller believer. I know that's going to put me in the minority. I think he can come back for his junior or senior season and be really good, one of the best quarterbacks in the country. I think it is all in there. And then you've got two really, really good backs in Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, two guys that could have gone, at least mid-round in the NFL draft. And now you're going to have three guys who could be, top 2 rounds of the NFL draft, something like that. I mean, they can be really good offensively. I think you've got the tight end position figured out largely in a succession plan, Tyler Warren. But I like their chances. It does not surprise me at all to put them in the college football playoff, and the upper crust of that based on having the running back and the quarterback clarity that they do. I'm not going to disagree with it.
Just got to figure out receiver, Jason.
I know. It helps when those guys catch passes.
Any pad. They did not get the single one against Notre Dame. And I think that's I see Drew Aller get buried in a lot of places, and I think that interception is one of those mistakes that if you don't watch Penn State all season, you see him make that mistake late in the game, you say, yeah, this guy's not ready for primetime. I look at it and say, that was a horrific route by Omari Evans.
Give the guy some receivers. If he had Ohio State receiving talent, which I know is, asking a lot, but I mean, if he had a fraction of that, imagine how much better Drew Aller could be.
If he had Notre Dame, that Greathouse kid that was running all over the field on Penn State, looked great. I mean, he made some big plays to keep them in that game against Ohio State. Just a guy like Greathouse. He's not like, Jeremiah Smith, future 1-1, probably, if things work out the way he's going, a Hall of Fame type. I don't think you need that from Penn State. You just need productive guys like a KJ Hamler, an Allen Robinson, these guys that they've been able to produce.
One or two guys who are going to be in the NFL. How about that? How about that? Is that too much to ask for a program with Penn State status? I don't think so.
It should not be. So it'll be interesting to see what they're able to do in the portal. Jason, we're going to get into your bread and butter here. We're going to get into some Pirates. So stay tuned.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.